there has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch by Kohberger.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. First and foremost, today I want to wish everyone a happy Memorial Day weekend and think of the real reason for Memorial Day weekend. Both current members of the service, the armed forces, and those who have given up the ultimate sacrifice in order to keep us free and to protect our country. That's what Memorial Day weekend is about. And when you get together with your friends and your family and your loved ones, and you're all around having fun and like family should, getting together, remember the people that gave the supreme sacrifice so that we all could be free. I know it's a cliche, but freedom is never free. There is a price to pay for it. And there are those in the armed forces, the armed services. And again, both, if you see people in the armed forces, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, National Guard, all of these corpsmen, all of these great Air Force, tell them you appreciate them. Go up to them. If you're in a bar, buy them a drink. They'll be thrilled, believe me. Thank them for their service. They absolutely deserve that, 100%. And I don't want to preach, but I think I'd be remiss in not mentioning that we should acknowledge our armed forces on Memorial Day weekend. Well, enough said. Folks, there's being so many things said about this case, the Idaho quadruple, Brian Kohberger, of course. And so many things happened in the last couple of weeks, of course. The grand jury indictment, him being arraigned in court, Brian Kohberger being arraigned in court, choosing to stay silent, which resulted in the judge in the case, a judge, turning in a not guilty plea for him. Now, that makes this case not simpler, but even more complicated. We all remember, we've been following this case since November 13th, that hearings were supposed to start June 26, probable cause hearings. Now, the grand jury indictment made that unnecessary. That supersedes the probable cause hearings. There's been a true bill returned by the grand jury. Thus, Brian Kohberger has been indicted for 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary first degree. And we'll get into what all of that means. But some other breaking news that to me is a little bit disturbing. And I'm going to talk about the house, 1122 King Road. And we all know that the owner of that house, I guess, realizing that he could never, ever rent that house again, I don't know if that was his exact thoughts, donated it to the university, to Idaho University. And the idea of Idaho University is, of course, to destroy it because it's a bad omen. It's an eyesore in that community that always brings people back to those November 13th, the bad things that happened there. So what I'm hearing, and it hasn't been confirmed, but we know that the university wants to destroy that house, to have it destroyed and perhaps not have anything standing on that property. However, I am totally against it, and I'll tell you why. This case is probably not going to go on trial until 2024. At first, the next date, the judge set a trial date of October 2nd. I don't see it occurring then. There's going to be adjournments and adjournments and adjournments. And just remember, this is a potential death penalty case, which prolongs this case even longer. It becomes more difficult to prosecute it. It just becomes more open to appeal because of the fact that it is a death penalty case. There are more attorneys involved. more prosecutors, and of course, more defense attorneys. And we always remember, of course, and I remind all the time, that the defense, their job is to create doubt. And the prosecution, of course, wants to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. What is reasonable? What is a reasonable doubt? And we'll talk about that. And I've spoken about that before. What is a reasonable person standard? All of those things will be read to the jury, and when the jury is initiated, when they do come with the jury. The other thing is, because it is a potential death penalty case, the jurors all have to be polled on their feelings towards the death penalty. Are they pro or are they con? As I understand, they will only seat people on the jury who are pro death penalty. So what does that do right away? I believe that gives the prosecution a bit of an advantage in the way that the persons that are on the jury will be more pro law enforcement. But if they seated people on that grand jury that were anti-death penalty, I don't think there's be any potential. Look, we can argue about it that it's probably not a great idea anyway, because if someone is convicted of a crime like this heinous crime, and again, Brian Kohberger is innocent until proven guilty. Right now, 2 phases of it occurred, and that was the arrest phase, which we know the police have to have had probable cause, which are facts and circumstances that would allow a reasonable person to believe that a crime had been committed and the person being arrested committed the crime. It's the lowest standard of anything in the criminal justice field is probable cause. It's just the necessary rung, R-U-N-G, rungs on the ladder of suspicion in order to make an arrest. And on the ladder of suspicion, I used to teach this. There's the first rung of the ladder is mere suspicion. The second rung is reasonable suspicion. And the third rung is probable cause, which of course is the arrest phase. I feel like I'm teaching a criminal justice course, but that's okay. I'm privileged to be talking to you guys on this holiday weekend. So let's get back to the house. I think it's a bad idea that they destroyed that house, because, any homicide investigator knows that when there's a murder at a location, the investigator really needs to walk through that crime scene, to take a look at that crime scene, to smell that crime scene, to feel that crime scene, to feel the aura of that crime scene. And only a sworn law enforcement officer knows that and knows what that feels like. So in the same way, pictures or a recreation of the crime scene through video or whatever means they could do it if the house is destroyed will not have the same effect on the jury. I believe that they need to keep that house intact. And when the time comes, if the jury requests to, or if the prosecution requests of the judge, Your Honor, I would like for the jury to visit the crime scene so they can envision what occurred, where it occurred, how it occurred, during the time that it occurred, and they can feel it, they can view it, and they can maybe get the feeling of what it was like for those victims on November 13th at 04:15 in the morning, 04:10 in the morning. They could feel that. And that is a necessary component of this. That's why I am so against them destroying that house. And I hear there was on another channel, and I won't mention the channel. He's a very respected former law enforcement officer. But the reason that the University of Idaho is giving for destroying the house is because the community needs to get over this. The community is healing. The community needs to heal, and getting rid of that house is one of the first steps. No, the community can deal with it. It's more important that this house stays intact as an evidentiary means, an evidence against the person that did this. And if the community has to be a little traumatized for a little while longer, then so be it. Just stay away from the house. I think in a way, in a perverse way, I think the university really wants to get rid of that house more than the community. I think it's probably hurting them in the pocketbook, and sad to say, but I think it's true. It's hurting the university. It's probably hurting the community in the pocketbook that they have this eyesore and this horrible, horrible memory. Raggedy Hobo, for how long are we supposed to freeze every major crime scene in America? That's why we invented the technology. Well, this is an unusual crime scene, Raggedy Hobo. This is a crime scene where 4 young college students were slaughtered. And if it would helps in the conviction of the person being charged with this, that they keep this, and it's the crime scene is closed. They're just guarding the outside so no one would vandalize the house or try to enter the house. The crime scene is closed, but the house is important in regards to evidence. And if the University of Idaho has to leave the house there for a little while longer, I think it needs to stay there until the trial is completed. If that goes into 2024, then so be it. So be it. It's more important that the witnesses get to view this, they get to walk through this. And what is the rush? What is the, I understand you folks are saying that, oh, how long should the crime scene stay open? Look, this is who it's important for. This is why they have to maintain that crime scene, because of Ethan Chapin, Zaina Knodel, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Gonsalves. That is the whole reason they need to secure this crime scene, not because the community needs to heal. The community will heal, all right? The community is not that fragile that they're not going to be able to heal. You know, one of the things that what I named this episode today was Kohberger's overwhelming evidence plays a factor in the death penalty decision. And that wasn't my words. This is the words of a former prosecutor, actually an outstanding prosecutor from Orange County, California, who was a very high-profile prosecutor, now teaches law, now is in private practice. But he's the one that said, and I never heard this said before, that the evidence in this case is overwhelming. And I don't totally believe it's overwhelming unless he knows something that I don't know. Let me play a little bit of this and you'll see what I'm saying, because there are many people, both in the chat and many people. I listened or I watched some of the other channels. I don't watch them for very long because I don't like to listen to a lot of the other channels because I don't want them to affect what I say. Look, I worked 27 years in the NYPD, 16 in the detective bureau. I know what it's like to hunt a killer, and to go into a crime scene. A lot of these talking heads have no idea what it's like to strap a gun onto your hip and go search for a murderer, So they can have any ideas they want and they can invent things like this guy was a mastermind. I never met a mastermind criminal in my entire police career. And I don't know of anyone that I worked with that has ever said, maybe some are more clever than others, but I never met a mastermind, especially not a mastermind murderer. So all these people, the talking heads that are inventing that term, oh, he's a mastermind. No, he's not. He did so many stupid things that to call him a mastermind is a perversion of that term, So let me play a little bit of this. This is the former prosecutor, Matt Murphy from Orange County, California.
Former homicide prosecutor, Matt Murphy. Matt, we know that some of the victims' families do want the death penalty. These crimes were heinous. But yeah, they don't blame that. I don't blame them. But how does a prosecutor make this decision?
So a prosecutor under these circumstances will weigh the aggravating versus mitigating circumstances. It's essentially the same job that a jury will be asked to do. And this case is so overwhelmingly awful, for lack of a better term. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure within the DA's office to actually seek the death penalty on that.
And the evidence seems to be very strong. I mean, it's not circumstantial. There's DNA evidence, there's cell phone evidence, there's a lot of evidence here.
The evidence against Brian Kohberger is overwhelming.
Boom. I never heard anyone else in connection with this case say that the evidence against Brian Kohberger is overwhelming. This is the first time I've heard this. This guy is the real deal. There's a real homicide prosecutor. We see some of these lawyers on the air. Some of them aren't Murder prosecutors are not homicide. This guy is the real deal. If he says the evidence is overwhelming, are we just to believe a talking head on YouTube that is saying, "Oh, they're going to beat this case"? You just heard a real homicide prosecutor say the evidence in this case is overwhelming.
And that actually is a factor in that decision. Essentially, when people weigh the death penalty, elected DAs, they look for two things. They look for overwhelming evidence, absolutely no doubt of guilt, because the jury will be allowed to consider that in the penalty phase. And remember, this is a bifurcated system. So first there's the guilt trial, and then there's the penalty trial. They are allowed to consider what's called lingering doubt. So if you have a case where there's some wiggle room or a juror might not be sure, they're allowed to consider that in imposing the death penalty. The second thing that every elected DA will consider in making a decision like this is the shocking nature of the crimes. The vast majority of cases that are eligible for the death penalty in the United States, the elected DAs don't actually seek it. In Orange County, we sought it in less than 4%. So it is.
Wow. Why so seldom?
Well, for one thing, you want to be absolutely sure as a prosecutor because you have to take the death penalty very seriously, even in a state like California where it's essentially symbolic. It's a big deal to do it. It's also a lot more work and it takes a lot longer. And then it faces much harsher appellate scrutiny once the conviction and the sentence is imposed.
It also affects how you pick a jury.
It absolutely does. Now, what's interesting about this is that you're entitled to what's called a death qualified jury. So they'll bring in the veneer or the jurors for the trial, and they'll all fill out questionnaires, and they will be asked about their views on the death penalty. And if they cannot follow Idaho law, which allows for the death penalty, they will be excluded for what's known as cause.
See, that's amazing. And I never knew that before because I don't think I had ever or even well, in Manhattan, New York State had the death penalty, but the Manhattan district attorney during my tenure on the job would never go for the death penalty. I believe most of the time when I was on the job, I think all the time was Robert Morgenthau, who happened to be a legendary district attorney, but he was against the death penalty. So he specifically wouldn't go for the death penalty. And many of the other district attorneys throughout the city also, I don't think any of them would go for it now, even though it is the law in New York State.
So they won't actually be in the jury panel, or they shouldn't be.
So you've been in this position before as a prosecutor, a homicide prosecutor. What do you think he's going to do?
I think this one is pretty clear. My guess is he's seeking the death penalty. Now, behind the scenes, what's happening is he's probably meeting with the defense and saying, show me what you got to try to talk me out of it. In California, we call that a livesy hearing. In Idaho, I don't know what they call it, but I'm sure they're going through that process right now.
Thank you for watching.
Amazing, huh, folks? I mean, so now, do they go for the death penalty? And you heard him say that the prosecution will actually go to the defense, convince me why I shouldn't go for the death penalty. Because and in a case like this, there's also a very good chance that they wouldn't accept a plea if he wants to plead guilty. And I'm not saying he is, but if he wanted to, there's a good chance that they won't accept it. They may want this because there'll be no offer. There's not going to be any deal on the table. Jennifer, thank you for the $3 super sticker. My dad worked probation and parole in prison, so he knows the criminal justice system. Snug with Pug. Oh, that was Snug with Pug. I put someone else up on the screen. Snug with Pug, thank you for the $4.49 super sticker. Very much appreciated. So, guys, we're learning some new things here because much of what we're seeing now, we're seeing a lot of sensational stuff in regards to this case. And all of the really interesting things because, look, let's face it, even though this case is a horrific case, it's quite interesting. It is quite interesting. We had the specter of a potential serial killer, although right now they're not finding a second murder, so it's looked upon he's a mass murderer. And many people have tried to paint him as this mastermind because he was a PhD student. And when you look at his psychology and when you look at his background, He's drawn a lot of interest from profilers, from forensic psychologists who are comparing his personality to a serial killer, although they haven't been able to connect him to a second murder, which make him a serial killer. But still, coming out of this, being a mass murderer is still quite an interesting thing. Now, we also spoke about, was he stalking anyone? Who was he targeting in this case? Was he stalking one of these girls? Had there been a prior meeting with any of these girls here? And why, when he did commit this, if he did commit this heinous crime, why did he kill 4 people? And if he was specifically targeting one person, that's why a lot of these talking heads want to show you who he is without actually knowing who he is. Let's play a little bit of this here from Law and Crime.
The prosecution has indicted Mr. Kohberger for willfully intentional premeditation, going in and killing, slaughtering, I would say, these 4 kids, these 4 young people whose lives were ahead of them. And there's been speculation about evidence. Now, we know we do have a knife sheath that was left in the bed in the house, and that we do know before the gag order was put on that it did have DNA. Do we know whether or not anything happened to that DNA? Do we know whether it was tested, whether it was consumed, whether it came back to being Brian Kohberger? Tell us. Ben.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, Linda. Yeah, I think that's being analyzed right now. And obviously that is something the defense is going to challenge hard, the DNA evidence.
Yeah, because that's really the big deal. As we know, that's the one thing that doesn't depend upon, people's eyewitness testimony, which sometimes can be wrong. Julie Rendelman, there's also been speculation about the motive here. Some say, well, maybe he got dissed by one of the victims here, but the diss doesn't mean that he was dissed because he wanted to date somebody and she didn't want to. It could also be a diss to him because of who he is. It could be anything, couldn't it, Julie Rendelman?
Right. And remember, motive, they're not required to prove motive, but motive is certainly helpful for a jury to understand why it would be that an individual who hadn't committed such a heinous crime before entered into a home and decided to take the lives of these young women and man. But I do think that the prosecution is going to have a theory that they're going to bring along with them throughout this case. In terms of his motive, whether it be stalking or obsession or whatever it is in regards to.
Folks, we spoke, and other channels have spoken about this. Last week I had Dr. Joni Johnston on, and there was many people that had that theory of incel, and that stood for, and I had never heard that term before in my entire police or homicide career or academic career. Incel, which stood for involuntarily celibate. So it was someone that wanted to have sex but was incapable or unable because of probably more of a personality defect, where the person was unable to meet women. So that was one of the theories. So let's play more of this and we'll hear what she has to say.
At least one of the women that live there. And I think that is going to be something that you are definitely going to hear about throughout the trial.
And Ben, going back to your original point, when they had not found Brian Kohberger yet, and I was staying at a house down at the Jersey Shore, and it had a backyard that people could enter and come up with the windows and all. I was like, whoa, let me stay up all night, because his look is scary. And when he was in that courtroom today, nothing has changed about that look. He seems that he is going to do what he's going to do. He's going to be strong at it. And I can only imagine, if he is the killer, the poor victims in that house. So with that being said, it's wise to keep him out of the courtroom as much as you can if you're a defense attorney, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. He has a very creepy affect. He's very confident. He's not scared. He doesn't look like he doesn't have the look. It sounds silly, but he doesn't have the look of somebody who has been falsely accused, because that would be the look of terror and pleading and wanting to make your innocence known. There's nothing about his affect that suggests that.
Yeah, terror and pleading is what I now associate with.
Folks, one of the things I've noticed, and that this attorney here has definitely hit it on the head, that he doesn't have the body language of someone who's terrified, at least in court. He doesn't have that, if he was innocent, he might have that pleading look like, I didn't do this. He doesn't have that. He has that sort of look of, yeah, I want my day in court. I did it. Now, I want my day in court, though. This is about me. I get to shine. I get to be famous. It's sort of a perversion. But why did he do this in the first place? But this attorney hit it on the head. He definitely does not have the look in court of an innocent person. How does an innocent person look in court? Well, different body language than what Brian Kohberger is displaying right now.
The victims in this case. So Julie Rendelman, can the fact we know that there's an issue that when he was arrested, he said, has anyone else been arrested? Number one, this is the A part for you, Julie. Who do you think that was about? Number two, what is the best evidence the prosecution has right now? And remember, we are under a gag order. And number three, if they got to him through genetic genealogy and they're not giving that over to the defense, can the defense poke holes in the case? So A, B, and C, Julie, I know you can do it.
I can't remember A. So, I'm going to have to go. Let's start last.
Okay.
I'll be honest. If I'm the prosecution, I'm handing over everything. I'm not hiding anything. I don't want any chance on earth that if I get a guilty verdict at the end of the day, that anyone's going to be able to have an appellate issue that I didn't turn over anything and everything. So whether it be DNA, genealogy, trees, I don't care what it is, I'm turning it over because this is not the case to hold back anything. In terms of what is the best evidence, I think the sheath is the thing that stands out to everyone. But I think what we're ultimately going to believe and what the prosecution is going to argue is put the sheath to the side. Look at all the different pieces of evidence.
She's great because I've been saying this for months. Connect the dots. Don't depend on one piece of evidence. Put all the different evidence together, and we talk about circumstantial evidence. When piled up on top of each other is extremely powerful evidence. We talk about the video of his car parking behind the house, right? The video of his car by that gas station further away from the house. His cell phone being turned on and turned off. There's also a potential, and I don't know if you guys watched this, if his cell phone was even in his possession and he had it on airplane mode, there's a potentiality it could have hooked up in that house electronically to their Wi-Fi system. So the prosecution could be holding that now and not talking about it at all. Is that powerful information, you think? Is that powerful evidence? I think that's ridiculously powerful. If his cell phone, I forget the term they use in the electronic world, but somehow hooked up to their Wi-Fi system and is an electronic message to that's ridiculously powerful, ridiculously. And there's a potential of that. Also, once the dirty deed was committed, you connect the dots again, following his car, and at some point he turns his cell phone back on, and it's hitting cell sites at locations consistent with fleeing or leaving from the. I won't use the word flee because that's that may be prejudicial, but traveling away from this crime scene. Goes back, was driving maybe 30 to 45 minutes, hitting cell sites, unexplained like why, but can we surmise, if we're the prosecutor or if we're members of the jury, that the reason he was driving around and without going back to where he lived at the Washington State University, Pullman, Washington, why was he driving around? Could we maybe surmise that he was getting rid of the murder weapon? Maybe he was getting rid of the clothes he wore Maybe he wore a jumpsuit over his clothes that undoubtedly would have had blood spatter on it. But again, we don't know so much about the evidence that may be recovered. Do we know if the police recovered blood evidence, fiber evidence, hair evidence inside that car, inside Brian Kohberger's car? We don't know. That hasn't been released yet. So all of the evidence that we're talking about, potentially extremely powerful evidence. But right now, we don't know. But I'm saying to what you know right now, connect the dots. You know, they're saying, oh, they can argue the DNA. Okay. They can argue the DNA. I don't agree. I think that's very powerful evidence. But there's more evidence than just the DNA. Let's connect the electronic dots, the digital evidence. So all of those things, I'm going to get back to this. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like real crime, true crime, from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. And if you're not subscribed to us, go on our YouTube, hit that, give us a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and join us. It's free to join. It's free to subscribe on our YouTube. And folks, if you want to support us financially, we have a Patreon with 3 different levels. And we also have a YouTube channel memberships with, count them, 5 different levels. And you see the folks in the green font, they're part of our YouTube family, our friends, our fans, our subscribers, and we really appreciate them. So guys, I'm just hearing so much about this case that every day it seems that another channel or another talking head comes up with more information as to, oh, he's going to beat this case. Oh, he didn't do it. He had an accomplice, with absolutely no evidence whatsoever. So I think that really spurred me on actually to go live tonight, because I got to, watching one of the shows again with the house, the whole thing with 1122 King Road. I just cannot even believe that they would consider knocking that house down before the trial. I just think that it's such a big mistake to do that. But look, that's their decision. It's the university, although the court could actually order the university not to do it. So we'll see what happens.
Look at the cellular data that I think is going to be overwhelming in this case in terms of where that car was and when it was. I think those pieces are going to be even more dominant in this trial than any DNA.
So Ben, I'll go to the A question that Julie didn't answer, but
I forgot that one.
But there was so much there. When he was arrested, allegedly, Brian Kohberger said, has anyone else been arrested? Do you think that there's somebody else that could be arrested that could be complicit in such a way? I mean, we haven't, I know there's a gag order, but we haven't heard much from the family, have we? His family.
No, that's a fascinating piece of the puzzle. Of course, his asking is also, arguably incriminating as well. There doesn't seem to be any evidence yet of the complicity of somebody else, but it would be interesting to see how it plays out.
Okay, so I have a really interesting question, Julie Rendelman, as a former prosecutor. And it was a question for our question and answers that one of our viewers sent in, and we didn't get a chance to answer it. Let's assume that Brian Kohberger went into that house and targeted 1 or 2 victims. Maybe he targeted one and one of the women upstairs, and she happened to be with another woman, and he kills both. And then he finds other people in the house really who are witnesses, or that he unexpectedly encounters. Do you think that he could be found guilty, for instance, maybe of 1 intentional homicide, but 3 manslaughter counts? Could there be a difference in degree that the defense will be concentrating on?
That's a great question. I don't see manslaughter. I believe, and again, I don't know the specifics, but it might not be premeditated for all of them. But I believe there's no question it's going to be murder. I think it's going to be hard pressed for the jury to decipher which did he go in just for one person? Did he go in for multiple individuals? But I can't fathom a scenario in which they find him guilty of murder one in regards to one of the victims and then simply come back with manslaughter in regards to the other three.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you, but I do think he had at least one of the victims in his sights for being dissed, and I'm not sure it's for being dissed in the manner we think it is, that, you know, she rejected him for dating. But we'll find that out, and that's why there's a gag order, because we're all speculating right now. In any event, we're going to take a quick break.
So, folks, that was pretty interesting. They're pretty intelligent people. I think that was reasonable. We're not hearing a lot of the sensationalism that you hear from some other people, you know, conjecture of what was in his state of mind when he did this, you know, like manslaughter has different states of mind, recklessness as compared to intentional depraved mind murder. And for, I believe in Idaho, for it to be a murder first degree, there has to be some underlying factors. And I think that's one of the reasons that they charged burglary first degree with this also, was that there was underlying factors in this case. And, you know, one of the things also is that members of the families of the Idaho victims, they are backing. They want the death penalty. They want to see this. They want. Look, you can fully understand why they would feel this way, but they want him to get the death penalty. So, is that a factor? Will the prosecutor poll the family and ask, what if he does get convicted, what penalty would you want? And I believe the Gonsalves family has already indicated that they would like to see him get the death penalty. In this video also recently, Brian Kohberger's parents testified in a grand jury in Pennsylvania. It was in regards to a missing woman who was found dead in Pennsylvania, and they tried to, or they were looking to see if it was connected at all to Brian Kohberger. And I don't know if the investigation is totally completed, but it appears that they don't think that it was connected to him, and that potentially his parents could have testified because they were trying to create an alibi as to where Brian Kohberger was at the time of this missing woman's disappearance. Where was he at that time? That's what's been reported as to why they testified.
Shared with investigators based on a Pennsylvania law that allows judges to release transcripts to agencies after a court hearing. Meanwhile, the families of Kaylee Gonsalves and Madison Mogan have filed notices. They plan to indicate the pursuit of legal action against the city within the next 2 years. Kaylee's father, Steve Gonsalves, seeks clarity on the state's intention to seek the death penalty.
We can't sit here and say, oh, if there was 5 victims or 6 victims or 7 victims, then you go for the death penalty. No, it's been crossed. The line's been crossed, and we're going to go there.
So emotions are running high as the trial approaches. Both the victims and the families and the greater Moscow community, they want nothing more than justice for their lost loved ones. Attorney Shannon Gray, representing the Gonsalves family, joins us to discuss. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Can you kind of provide us with an update? We know Brian Kohberger was in court this week. What is the latest?
Well, we have our motion scheduled for the non-dissemination order on June 9th. My motion is scheduled at 10:30, and then the Associated Press's motion is scheduled at 1:30 that day. I'm not sure if the judge will make a ruling that day or if the judge will take some time to make a decision on the rulings. And then we have Mr. Kohberger's trial set into October. So,
well, could you go ahead and elaborate the family's intention to seek justice beyond the criminal trial? What are their expectations? What do they want?
Well, I mean, every family, I think they want justice for the deaths of their daughter and Maddie and Xana and Ethan. So, you know, it's part of the process. You know, the tort claims notice that I filed is just standard procedure. That's something that has to be filed to protect the interests not only of the families, but the victims, and the community. You know, we hope that everything went perfectly and everybody did the right things. But if for some reason something went wrong or something, someone might need to be held accountable for something, you're mandated to file those notices. So.
Well, is the death penalty for Brian Kohberger, is it still up for question in this case?
Well, we spoke with the prosecutor on the case, Mr. Thompson. He's going to be with all the families, I think, individually, and then make a decision based on that. So the Gonzalez family obviously supports the death penalty in this case. So,
how are the families doing right now? How are they coping with the loss of their loved ones? Have they had any mental health support providing them during this difficult time?
Well, they're a strong family. I think they all have their good days and their bad days. They still have other children to raise. Kaylee had sisters and a brother, and so they're still trying to move forward with those types of things. But every day is a challenge. Some days are more emotional than others. The arraignment on Mr. Kohberger hit Christy pretty hard, and Steve had to try to be a rock on that day. And then some days Christy has to be a rock for Steve. So I prepared them moving forward on all of the things that might happen and how the timeline might play out. But they are a great family.
Yeah, it's really an awful situation. Could you also kind of share any details about the evidence against Brian Kohberger and the prosecution's strategy for the upcoming trial?
We don't have any of that information. They don't share any of that stuff with us. I think that's part of them keeping everything close to the vest. There's the idea that having no information out to the public at all in some way protects the jury pool. But we would prefer that we'd have some information shared with us, but we really don't have anything.
Okay.
So we don't know.
Shannon Gray, thank you.
So, folks, one of the things in the beginning of this case, we all remember, and I would never criticize anything Steve Gonzalez did. He's a grieving father. I've praised him on other broadcasts. He's that strong American father that's standing up for his family, and he's the face of his family. And and you heard his attorney Shannon Gray say that some days he's the rock, and some days he needs his wife to be the rock, because it's probably unbearable to deal with this type of grief and this type of pain. Because what we always have to think of is those four people that are on the screen right now. Ethan Chapin, Zaina Knodel, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Gonzalez. That's who we always have to think about. And sometimes we lose that. We lose the thinking about who and what this case is about. And, it's heartbreaking to think of Ethan Chapin, who at the time of this incident was 20 years old, and he's a triplet. He's one of three. He's got a sister and a brother. And if anyone knows anything about triplets or twins, they're like, they feel pain when they're not even near each other, of the pain the other person is having, because that's how psychologically and physically connected they are. So you really have to feel horrifically sorry for his family, his siblings, and as well as the Madison Mogan, Zaina Knodel, and Kaylee Gonzalez. I'm not dismissing them, but just when you think about being a triplet and the fact that they lost, here is a picture of them. That's Ethan Chapin with his brother and his sister. And they also go to the University of Idaho. Imagine how difficult that must be, that they're also students at the University of Idaho, and they've had to get through all of this, and we go back to November 13th. Remember, in a school calendar, what's happening, you pretty much taking some of your exams for the first semester, and you're going home for Thanksgiving. And this happened on November 13th. So half the school or more cleared out and didn't come back. And I believe the school allowed them to finish up their classes online, which we learned all about online during the whole COVID thing. But many of the students at the University of Idaho never returned. And maybe many of them, I don't know for a fact, many of them maybe never returned to the school. There was a lot of fear, and students coming back or never coming back to the school. And so that could also be a reason. We circle back to to what we were speaking about earlier, is that 1122 King Road. We're hearing that they're going to knock that down this summer. And it certainly appears to be that this potential trial isn't going to happen either late 2023 or it may not start until 2024, the next year, because we spoke about death penalty cases take much longer. They take much more resources, much more lawyers involved, both on the prosecution and the defense. So the death penalty complicates matters. So this could be, and I just want to get back while I'm on this, is they were speaking, and we brought it up numerous times, the discovery. And we all know the discovery is the evidence that the prosecution has. They are required to turn it over to the defense. But if you look up Idaho law, it doesn't say when. So I mentioned on a previous show, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, and of course I worked in Manhattan, when you would have a murder trial, very potentially the district attorney would show up the day before the trial was supposed to start and hand the defense 2 milk crates full of documents and evidentiary material. And of course, the defense would be like, what? And they would, of course, as a matter of procedure, Your Honor, there is no way I can be ready for trial tomorrow. I just received, as you can see, 2 milk crates full of evidentiary material. Judging by the size and the scope and the complexity of this case, I'm going to need about 2 months to go through all of this. And usually the judge would say, granted, and he would pick a date 2 months from that date, and the defense attorney would agree to it. But so discovery, is that strategic? Is that a strategic thing that a defense attorney does? Some now, I don't think prosecutors are allowed to do that in Manhattan anymore. I think that the state of New York passed discovery laws that precludes prosecutors from doing exactly that, which was a strategic move. So recently, the defense in this case filed motions that they want the grand jury minutes released basically immediately. That's pretty important, don't you think? There's probably evidentiary material that none of us know about in those grand jury minutes, because as we know, grand jury proceedings are secretive, and not just in Idaho, but all over the world. A grand jury has to be able to operate in secrecy. There's many reasons for that. One of the reasons is to keep the identity of witnesses secret. Other reasons could be to keep evidence that they don't want out there. And again, this is further complicated by the fact that there's a gag order on this case, because in the very beginnings of this case, all kinds of information was being leaked. And you hear some stations, even now, broadcast stations, oh, we got this from a person close to the investigation. Whenever I hear that, that doesn't make me feel very good. I feel that that's someone giving information to a broadcast station or a journalist that the person disseminating this information is in violation of a court order and could be arrested. So when the station says, oh, this is from a person close to the investigation, we got this information. And I don't feel that it's, look, when one station gets it, shouldn't all stations have it? Or, oh, we got this. We jumped all the other stations and we were able to break this. Well, because you got a mole. You got someone feeding you information, as you say, close to the investigation. And it's not okay, and that's why there is a gag order. I'm going to go over some of the other evidentiary things. Brian Kohberger's movements on the night of this, and they have a fantastic timeline on law and crime, and I'm going to play a little bit of this
from the King Road residence. This video canvas resulted in the collection of numerous surveillance videos in the area from both residential and business addresses. I have reviewed the numerous videos that were collected and have had conversations with other officers, and they go on to say that. A review of camera footage indicated, and this is where that white Hyundai Elantra comes into play. A review of camera footage indicated that a white sedan, hereafter suspect vehicle 1, was observed traveling westbound in the 700 block of Indian Hills Drive in Moscow at approximately 3:26 a.m. and westbound on Steiner Avenue at Idaho State Highway 95 in Moscow at approximately 3:28 a.m. On this video, it appeared suspect vehicle 1 was not displaying a front license plate. At this point, they didn't know it was the vehicle that we now know, the white Hyundai Elantra. This is how they first were able to identify it. A review of footage from multiple videos obtained from the King Road neighborhood showed multiple sightings of suspect vehicle 1 starting at 3:29 a.m. and ending at 4:20 a.m. Remember the timeline of when they think these murders occurred.
Folks, that's what I'm talking about when we talk about all of this evidence. When you connect the dots, and that's what, unfortunately, to use a little sort of juvenile term, connecting the dots, but it's so true. Connect the evidence, connect the dots. It makes sense. It starts to make sense. It starts to build a pile of circumstantial evidence and starts to build a very powerful pile of circumstantial evidence.
These sightings show suspect vehicle 1 makes an initial 3 passes by the 1122 King Road residence and then leave via Walenta Drive. Based off of my experience as a patrol officer, this is a residential neighborhood with a very limited number of vehicles that travel in the area during the early morning hours. Upon review of the video, there are only a few cars that enter and exit this area during this time frame. Again, this is also important because remember, he is charged with first-degree murder. There is a level of premeditation and planning to this. Keep this in mind as we hear all this. Suspect vehicle 1 can be seen entering the area a 4th time at approximately 4:04 a.m. It can be seen driving eastbound on King Road, stopping and turning around in front of 500 Queen Road, number 52, and then driving back westbound on King Road. When suspect vehicle 1 is in front of the King Road residence, it appeared to unsuccessfully attempt to park or turn around in the road. The vehicle then continued to the intersection of Queen Road and King Road, where it can be seen completing a 3-point turn and then driving eastbound again down Queen Road. Suspect vehicle 1 is next seen departing the area of the King Road residence at approximately 4:20 a.m. at a high rate of speed.
Boom. Is that, as my compadre and my partner quite frequently, Mike Geary, will say, is that not consciousness of guilt? Why was the vehicle leaving the location at 4:20 a.m. at a high rate of speed? Does that mean anything? By itself, nothing. But with all of these other factors, it means a great deal, right? And Mike Geary, Professor Mike Geary, retired NYPD Sergeant Mike Geary, Attorney Mike Geary would say, that's consciousness of guilt. And I love that expression because it really tells the story.
Suspect vehicle 1 is next observed traveling southbound on Walenta Drive. Based on my knowledge of the area and review of camera footage in the neighborhood, that does not show suspect vehicle 1 during that time frame. I believe that suspect vehicle 1 likely exited the neighborhood at Palouse River Drive and Conestoga Drive. Palouse River Drive is at the southern edge of Moscow and proceeds into Whitman County, Washington. Eventually, the road leads to Pullman, Washington. Pullman, Washington is approximately 10 miles from Moscow, Idaho. Both Pullman and Moscow are small college towns, and people commonly travel back and forth between them. We talked about this before when he was ultimately apprehended, the connection, the geographical distance between his university and where these murders occurred.
Folks, extremely, and he's explaining it very thoroughly and succinctly. But I want to pull the little hair I have out of my head when I hear people say, "Oh, he could have been delivering a pizza. He could have been working for DoorDash. He could have been, just circling. Yeah, at 4 o'clock in the morning, he was driving around in a barren, empty neighborhood." And then again, consider all of the other evidence. And then when you say things like that he could have been doing it, could have been doing that, it comes across as being ridiculous.
I'm going to continue on. Law enforcement officers provided video footage of suspect vehicle 1 to forensic examiners with the FBI that regularly utilizes surveillance footage to identify the year, make, and model of these unknown vehicles. The forensics examiner, and they go into the forensics examiner's background and experience. After reviewing the numerous observations of suspect vehicle 1, the forensic examiner initially believed that suspect vehicle 1 was a 2011-2013 Hyundai Elantra, but upon further review, he indicated it could also be a 2011-2016 Hyundai Elantra. As a result, investigators have been reviewing information on persons in possession of a vehicle of this type. Investigators were given access to video footage on the Washington State University, WSU.
This was very powerful. The Washington State University campus police officer that was able to identify this car and identify its owner, he did a tremendous job. It's akin to years ago, New York City had a serial killer named the son of Sam, David Berkowitz, who was shooting people with a .44 caliber bulldog in lovers' lanes all around New York City. And an officer wrote David Berkowitz's vehicle a summons, and that directly led to his being arrested for the murders. And that's what the piece of evidence was. So in this case, the Washington State University campus officer, identified the car and identified its owner.
Campus. This is how they were able to connect the car to Kohberger. If we have some more time, I'd like to get into it before we take our break. So let me do this real quick. Okay, so we're not going to take breaks. I'm going to continue to go forward with this. A review of that video indicated that at approximately 2:44 a.m. on November 13th, 2022, a white sedan, which was consistent with the description of the white Hyundai Elantra known as suspect vehicle 1, was observed on WSU surveillance cameras traveling north on Southeast Nevada Street at Northeast Stadium Way. At approximately 2:53 a.m., this is again before the murders, a white sedan, which is consistent with the description of the white Elantra known as suspect vehicle 1, was observed traveling southeast on Nevada Street in Pullman, Washington, towards SR 270. SR 270 connects Pullman, Washington to Moscow, Idaho. The camera footage from Pullman, Washington was provided to the same FBI forensic examiner. The FBI forensic examiner identified the vehicle observed in Pullman, Washington as being a 2014-2016 Hyundai Elantra. At approximately 5:25 a.m., this is after the killings, a white sedan, which was consistent with the description of suspect vehicle 1, was observed on 5 cameras in Pullman, Washington, and on the WSU campus cameras. The first camera that recorded the white sedan was located at 1300 Johnson Road in.
Folks, this is so powerful. This is such powerful evidence. And like when I hear people making up garbage, they have no clue about what they're talking about. Connect the dots. Listen to this. I mean, look, listen to the amount of video evidence they have on this. And again, by itself, doesn't mean that much. But no, it means something. But by itself, it's not as strong as the other evidence they have. Specifically, the DNA on the knife sheath. I know people say, oh, the defense is going to cut that up and they're going to rip that up. But this evidence here, connect the dots. And I hate to use that juvenile expression, but it is so damn true.
Pullman. The white sedan was observed traveling northbound on Johnson Road. Johnson Road leads directly back to West Palouse River Drive in Moscow, which intersects with Conestoga Drive. I mentioned those streets before. The white sedan was then observed turning north on Bishop Boulevard and northwest on SR 270. At approximately 5:27 a.m., the white Elantra was observed on cameras traveling northbound on Stadium Way at Nevada Street. They go on to talk a little bit more about where it goes. They provided a map showing what the campus looks like and kind of what the area looks like. They go on to say on November 25th, 2022, MPD, Moscow Police Department, asked area law enforcement agencies to be on the lookout for white Hyundai Elantras on the area. On November 29th, 2022, at approximately 12:28 a.m., Washington State University police officer Daniel Tiengo queried white Elantras registered at WSU. As a result of that query, he located a 2015 white Elantra with a Pennsylvania license plate, LFZ 8649. This vehicle was registered to Brian Kohberger, and he resides at 1630 Northeast Valley Road, apartment 201, Pullman, Washington. You have just seen how they were able to link the car to the defendant. The same day, at approximately 12:58 a.m., WSU officer Curtis Whitman was looking for white Hyundai Elantras and located a 2015 white Hyundai Elantra at 1630 Northeast Valley Road in Pullman in the parking lot. 1630 Northeast Valley Road is an apartment complex that houses WSU students. Officer Whitman also ran the car and returned it, and it returned back to Kohberger with a Washington tag. This is where now you're going to see how they matched up the description from one of the roommates to the license. I reviewed Kohberger's Washington State driver license information and photograph. This license indicates that Kohberger is a white male with a height of 6 feet and weighs 185 pounds. Additionally, the photograph of Kohberger shows that he has bushy eyebrows, which again is what was indicated by one of the surviving roommates.
Folks, just very, very interesting. All of it, again, one piece of evidence by itself is not anything to get excited about, but many pieces of circumstantial evidence. This, when I hear also like journalists criticizing the police work in this, the police did an unbelievable job. Just this video canvas in itself is not an easy thing to do. It really takes hundreds and hundreds of man hours to do it, painstakingly pulling up images and comparing them to the other images they had from the other cameras. Tremendous, tremendous work. And again, that Washington State University officer that was able to identify this car, tremendous work, just unbelievable work he did. And he should be, and the campus should be, and everyone should be proud of him because he did an incredibly great job. Folks, if you're looking for a great defense attorney in the New York metropolitan area, then Joe Murray is your man. Joe Murray is a retired NYPD police officer who became an attorney after he retired. And Joe is a fantastic attorney. You can contact him on his cell phone at 718-514-3855. Email him at joe@jmurray-law.com. His website is jmurray-law.com. Joe Murray is also a huge supporter of Police Off the Cuff, and we really appreciate Joe Murray, attorney at law. So, folks, when I read or hear all of these new, I don't know, I think a lot of times people just try to sensationalize this case. I think there is never enough evidence that you could say, oh, this is a slam dunk, that's a slam dunk, because you never know what a jury is going to do, especially in a case like this that is a death penalty case, potential death penalty case. So we speak all the T's have to be crossed and the I's dotted. But as that former prosecutor said, Matt Murphy, who was a homicide prosecutor from Orange County, California, he said inside unveiling the overwhelming evidence. He said that. I did not say that. He said that. And he's a homicide prosecutor. Do we believe him, or do we believe the talking heads on YouTube and some of the content creators that have never done anything in regards to law enforcement or worked on a homicide? He's saying this is a homicide prosecutor, a really good one too, from California, Orange County, California. He's saying there's overwhelming evidence. And even despite the fact that there could be overwhelming evidence, there is no guarantee you're going to get a conviction. Remember, the prosecution has to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. BARD, B-A-R-D, beyond a reasonable doubt. And the defense has to do what, guys? They have to create doubt. So that's their job. And they're working on that right now. They're working on that all the time, 24/7. They want to create doubt in this case. And that's why I say it's never, any of these cases are never, ever a slam dunk. There's no such thing when there's a jury. And, you know, the overwhelming evidence. I don't think I would say that. I would not say that for the fact that what if there's overwhelming evidence and they don't get a conviction? How would that make anyone feel? Yes, overwhelming evidence, but he got off. I mean, that could happen.
Kohberger's physical description is consistent with the description of the male DM, the male that DM, again, the pseudonym used for one of the surviving roommates, saw inside the King Road residence on November 13th. Further investigation, including review of Lake County Sheriff's Deputy CPL Duke's body cam and reports, showed that on August 21st, 2022, so this is months before this happened, Brian Kohberger was detained as part of a traffic stop that occurred in Moscow, Idaho. This was by Corporal Duke. At the time, Kohberger, who was the sole occupant in the car, was driving a white 2015 Hyundai Elantra with Pennsylvania plate LFZ 8649, the one I just mentioned. During the stop, which was recorded via a law enforcement body camera, Kohberger provided his phone number, and then they don't actually list the phone number, they redact that. Investigators conducted electronic database queries and learned that the phone number, the phone is a number issued by AT&T. Now, from now on, his phone is going to be identified as 8458 phone, 8458 phone. On October 14th, 2022, again, before the killings, Brian Kohberger was detained as part of a traffic stop by a WSU police officer. Upon review of the body cam and report of the stop, Kohberger was the sole occupant and was driving, again, the white 2015 Hyundai Elantra. On November 18th, this is after the killings, according to Washington State licensing, Kohberger then registered the 2015 white Elantra with Washington, and it later received a new plate of CFB 8708. That's because the license was about to expire. Prior to this time, the 2015 Elantra was registered in Pennsylvania, which does not require a front license plate to be displayed. Based on my own experience in communication with Washington law enforcement, I know that Idaho and Washington require front and back license plates to be displayed. Investigators believe that Kohberger is still driving the 2015 white Elantra because his vehicle was captured on December 13, 2022 by a license plate reader in Loma, Colorado. Kohberger's Elantra was then queried on December 5th, 2022 by law enforcement in Hancock County in Indiana. On December 16th, at approximately 2:26 p.m. surveillance video showed Kohberger's Elantra in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. The sole occupant of the vehicle was a white male whose description was consistent with Kohberger. Kohberger has family in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. Based on information provided on the WSU website, Kohberger, and I went through this already, where they went into his background and how he did that Reddit survey. Now let's go into the cell phone data. The cell phone data is always...
You know, folks, I don't, want to beat a dead horse, but you could see there's really good evidence in this case. There's lots of evidence too. I'm not going to say it's overwhelming. I would never say that as someone who has gone to jury trials and seen cases that you thought were overwhelming, that had tremendous evidence, see them go the other way. But I just think that when it comes out every other day with some other, really just crap, and you see the amount of evidence, and we don't even know. You look at some of the evidence that we haven't even heard about yet. Has anyone heard about the autopsy reports yet? No one has, because they're not out. Has anyone heard about the crime scene evidence? The crime scene evidence, the processing of the crime scene, the blood spatter, the hair, the fibers, the potentiality that the killer left his blood in the crime scene. Has anyone heard about that yet? No, absolutely not, because it's not out there. There's so much more we could also cover in this case. And I'm going to try to, it's definitely going to go where there's going to be a lot of behavioral analysts on this case, forensic psychologists, predicting his state of mind. And although motive is not a necessary component for the prosecution to prove, it's always a very good thing for them to be able to sort of let the jury know what they felt the motive was. Juries like to hear motives. It's not a necessary component, as I said, for the prosecution to prove. However, juries like to hear. So if the prosecution can come up with a theory of motive and go with that, that's a good possibility that they will try to explain the motive to the jury.
It's critical. So as part of this investigation, law enforcement obtained search warrants to determine cellular data devices that utilize cellular towers in close proximity to the King Road residence on November 13th, 2022, between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. Anybody who follows the Law and Crime Network knows cell phone data can track someone's location in pivotal points at important times. So what did it show here? This is interesting. After determining that Kohberger was associated to both the 2015 white Elantra and the 8458 phone, investigators reviewed these search warrant returns. A query of the phone in these returns did not show the phone utilizing cellular tower resources in close proximity to the King Road residence between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. So the cell phone data doesn't show that he was there or was using that phone near the residence. But that is only part of the story. Based on my training experience and conversation with law enforcement officers that specialize in the utilization of cellular telephone records, individuals can either leave their cellular telephone at a different location before committing a crime or turn their cellular telephone off prior to going to a location to commit a crime. As part of the was conducted in the area of the King Road residence. This video.
Well, sorry, folks, that was so amazing. So all of the digital evidence, we haven't heard of all of it either. So we're just, again, I could go on and on and on and on and on. And I think that we've been on for an hour and 12 minutes. I just wanted to talk about some of those things tonight. But there's going to be more and more, especially when they're going to look to show his state of mind when doing this. You know, again, there's no insanity plea in Idaho, but they want to explain why did he do this? Can that be explained? I don't know if you can explain that, but the prosecution, I believe, will want to explain that to the jury if they can come up with a motive, even though, again, they're not required to do so. Folks, I want to thank everyone for tuning in tonight. I know this is the Memorial Day weekend, and those who tuned in with me, I thank you for taking time away from your friends and family. And I think it was a great episode tonight. And I want to applaud all you guys for joining me, for joining in for this hour and 13 minutes. Again, if you're not subscribed, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up. Like us, put like. Also, make comments. I love to read your comments. I like to respond to them if possible. I can't respond to all of them, but I like to respond to them. Again, I want to wish everyone a fantastic Memorial Day weekend. And I want to thank you all for tuning in tonight. Have a great night and a great rest of your weekend. God bless from Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories.
One episode just ain't enough. Get a little laughter, get it in you too. We made it up. One episode just ain't enough.